NAIDOC is a time to celebrate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and achievements. Today, we come together to commemorate and celebrate our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander service history. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have a long and rich history of contributing to the defence of Australia. This contribution dates back to the Boer War at the turn of the 19th century, and since then, Indigenous people have served in many, if not all, of the major conflicts and peacekeeping missions to the present day. Importantly, many continue to proudly serve their country today as members of the Australian Defence Force and as defence civilians. To me, NAIDOC is an important time for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, as it reminds us all of not only the special place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but allows us to reflect on what has been achieved and still needs to be achieved in Australian Indigenous history and affairs. There is probably no better example of this than the current discussions on the inclusion of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. And while there's been no consensus on how that may look, I personally think that it's healthy that it is lively debate in the public forum. This year's theme for NAIDOC, We All Stand on Sacred Ground, Learn, Respect and Celebrate. Why is this important? In the defence context, it is timely for us to recognise that our bases and other places of work are all on Indigenous land, cared for and protected for thousands of years by the Indigenous traditional owners. It is up to Defence to not only recognise this ownership, but also be sensitive to the cultural significance of these lands and provide the appropriate considered care needed. While I've mentioned lands throughout this address, it should not be forgotten that we have a presence on the sea as well, and that the cultural significance of the connection to the sea by many Indigenous Australians should also be acknowledged, and the appropriate respect and care given to these maritime areas.
NAIDOC was originally started in 1957 when the first committee was formed, but really the idea of a day of celebration was built on the work of the Australian Aboriginal League and the Australian Aboriginal Progress Association during the 1920s and 30s. Back then, this group was standing up for the rights and protested about the status of the treatment of Aboriginal people. Ever since the contact of European colonisation, the rights of Aboriginal people have been kept getting ignored and taken away. We weren't treated the same as non-Indigenous people, and the likes of William Cooper and Douglas Nicholls lobbied the government and the King to pass the laws and policies to improve the life of the Aboriginal people. In the letters and petitions that they wrote fell on deaf ears, so they held a day of mourning, a protest march in Sydney on Australia Day 1938. Some say it was one of the first and largest civil rights gatherings. When these old blokes, William Cooper and Douglas Nicholls, raised if they wanted the government to make changes, they needed to let the Australian public know what was going on with the Aboriginal people, and they needed to have a day to draw the attention of these issues. Douglas Nicholls later went on to be the Governor of South Australia. He was also a pastor, and he was in the Citizen Military Forces in 1941, and he trained at Seymour and Bonegilla before being posted to the 28th Battalion. Through his religious work, following on the day of mourning, he established the Aboriginal Sunday, a day of Australian faith to consider what was happening to the Aboriginal people. By 1955, Aboriginal Sunday had moved from January to July, and by 1974 the day involved in an entire week of celebration, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island culture and heritage commencing on the first Sunday in July each year. Over the years, the names of the various committees that looked after NAIDOC changed, including the inclusion of islanders to acknowledge the cultural difference between the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islanders. So too the importance of NAIDOC Week has changed over the years. Standing out as our time of protest, NAIDOC Week has become an opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people to continue cultural exchanges and education for the broader Australian community. For us blackfellas, NAIDOC is an opportunity to celebrate our ongoing heritage and culture, a time to pass on in ongoing traditions and establish new ones. It is also a time of reflection where all Australians can reflect on the past and present achievements of the first Australians and our communities, particularly highlighting the achievements made in the previous 12 months. For me personally, I recognise the importance of passing on my family history and living culture. As I get older, I know how important it is for me to pass on my stories, the stories of my father and my grandfather. I look on NAIDOC Week as an opportunity to sit with family and pass on these stories before they are lost in time. Because the thing about success in life, no matter what it is or who you are recognised by it. Knowing your history and culture and heritage gives you an identity. Knowing where you came from and what mob you belong to gives you strength. And just like in the army, knowing what your role is and how you fit in gives you the purpose and a sense of place. NAIDOC this year is the theme. We stand on sacred ground, learn and respect and celebrate. And I reckon there's no better time for Australia to think about what that means, no matter what your background is or where you come from. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, wreaths will now be laid at the inauguration stone. The first wreaths will be laid by Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin, Chief of the Defence Force, and Mr Dennis Richardson, Secretary of the Department of Defence. Vice Admiral Tim Barrett, Chief of Navy, Brigadier Peter Daniel, representing the Chief of Army, and Air Marshal Leo Davies, Chief of Air Force. Major General Craig Orme, representing the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
They shall not grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ladies and gentlemen, today you heard about NAIDOC and about why we're here, but we're here to celebrate together because the word is we. We all stand on sacred ground and we always will. We are one nation, and the more that we celebrate together, the stronger that bond becomes. That concludes our 2015 NAIDOC Indigenous Service Wreath Laying Ceremony.